Sawadee Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today we're going to be studying the Pali Canon in English. We are in our third week of the Pali Canon in English study group, where we study the words of the Buddha. We start off with a brief meditation in order to kind of prepare the mind to start learning the teachings of the Buddha. So here soon, we will go into about a 15-minute meditation or so with some chanting going in and some chanting coming out. And then we will actually start studying the book Sotapanna, which I believe I have somewhere close by, or maybe not. I don't have it here on my desk, but I have it on the screen for those of you that are watching this by live stream in Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or Periscope. This book, Sotapanna, it is all about the first stage of enlightenment. It really provides teachings extracted from the 45 volumes of books in the Pali Canon, where a temple in Bangkok have curated and pulled out the various teachings related to the first stage of enlightenment. So this week, the group has been studying chapter 1 through chapter 27. And that sounds like a lot, but these books are actually quite small. And that probably takes all of about an hour maybe to read over multiple sittings if you decided to do it that way, which kind of helps to gradually drip it into the mind. And that chapter 1 through 27, this is an opportunity for students to come together and ask questions related to their study. Because on Sunday and Wednesday, we do the group learning program, which is based on developing a life practice, the path that leads to Nibbana, to provide a framework and a foundation, kind of a schematic of understanding how the Buddhist teachings are laid out. And then once students spend about 6 months or a year studying this book with all the associated resources like videos, audiobook, podcast, quizzes, receiving personal guidance and so forth, they're then ready to move into studying the teachings of the Buddha directly with the words of the Buddha. And these books, they're very well suited for entering into learning the Pali Canon in English. And there's a set of 13 of these books that if you like them in print, you can get them. But what I'm starting to do is I'm starting to scan these and bring them into the computer and update the translations and kind of improve upon some of the words and language that are being used, because the people who did the vast majority of these translations are people that have been around for many, many years. One of the translators was born in 1905. Another one was born in 1944. And while they did a phenomenal job of putting the Buddhist teachings into really amazing language and helping us to understand the Buddhist teachings and really illuminating the path, some of the words can be somewhat challenging for even a native speaker. I know when I was learning through these books, I was constantly consulting a dictionary and having to understand a lot of the language that was being used. And depending on who's studying these books and where you've grown up and what your vocabulary has been like, you may be finding it even more challenging than what I was finding it. So what I'm doing is I'm moving all of these books into soft copy form in PDF, where they can be easily accessible and downloaded with updated language and translations that will help the common reader understand this. So even if you've already got printed versions of these books, I would encourage you to go to our Facebook page, which is Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Go to the files section, and from there you can download the book. Even right now, if you haven't actually seen these books yet, the first 2 books are there waiting for you so that you can download it. And this book is there, and it's been updated. And today Max and I are going to be using those files from our Facebook group in order to share the teachings and allow the students from all over the world to ask questions about what they've been studying. The questions that we might get are questions about a specific sentence or a specific word or paragraph that someone needs help with to understand. we might get questions about the entire teaching, and someone maybe just didn't understand it and is interested to get my perspective on what this particular teaching is sharing with us. Or you might have read it and feel like you have a pretty good understanding and comprehension of it, and you would like to confirm your understanding. And in that situation, you can share what is your understanding of that teaching, and then I will help kind of draw some other things out that maybe you didn't observe as part of reading that particular teaching. So I would encourage people to come into Zoom, because if you are watching this on any of our live streaming platforms, there's going to be Zoom login information, and you can come in and you can interact and talk with us. But you can also do that through Facebook and YouTube, because our moderator Max is looking there for any comments and questions that you might mention in YouTube or Facebook, and then those will get fed into the class after we do our meditation. So once we do our meditation, I will open things up for a good hour and a half, almost 2 hours, to any questions that you guys have on any of the teachings from chapter 1 to 27. And we will be displaying this on the screen. So if you didn't actually read yet, or you don't even have access to the books yet, or if this is the first time you're even seeing a live stream from us, you can still stick around, because we're going to be displaying the Buddha's words on the screen, and you'll be able to learn right along with other people who maybe have already read. And once you get some benefit out of today's class, you can kind of join the future classes by downloading the books and reading ahead, which is where you'll actually get a lot more benefit. But even if you haven't read at all, you're still going to get plenty of benefit from participating in today's class. So I'd like to thank you for joining. Thank you for being very interested in learning and practicing the Buddhist teachings, because by all of us learning and practicing these teachings, it just makes the world a better and better place. It makes our world, our own individual mind, becomes improved, where it becomes more peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy on this path to enlightenment, because that is the enlightened mind. The more wisdom that you gain from the Buddhist teachings, the more you learn and practice his teachings, your life will become more peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, because your mind is going to become more peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. And with all of us moving closer and closer to enlightenment and training the mind to be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, we're putting less and less harm into the world. So therefore, by us focusing on our own mind and our own training, it's making the world a better place. So if we're interested in improving this world, we need to first improve our own mind. And that's what the Buddhist teachings are all about. There's no belief here whatsoever. It's all about learning and practicing his teachings. So let's get started with our brief meditation, just to kind of prepare the mind for learning the Buddhist teachings. If you're seated or standing or lying, just take a position where the body is comfortable and the spine is erect. Just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. We're just going to do a real brief meditation just to kind of center the mind, kind of clear it out, and prepare it for learning. I'm going to do some chanting, but many of you guys are learning these chants and practicing them yourself, so you're welcome to join along in the chant. But just breathe in and out. Just kind of preparing the mind. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหากวาพุทธังมหากวันนังอภิวาเทมิ สวากขาโตมหควตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิ สุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆ Sangฆัง Namami. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho. Vicacaranang sammuno sakhato rokavitu anuttero purisa dhammasati satatava manusanang Bhoto Bhagavati. Okay, just take some nice, steady, consistent breaths. Breathing in and out. You're not interested in controlling the breath or forcing it. Just a nice, natural breath. Focusing the mind on the sound or sensation of the air entering into the nose. Breathing in and out. At any point where the mind wanders, just cut that off. Let it go. Focus the mind on the breath, the present moment. I'm going to keep my guidance short here so that you can just focus in on breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังภะคะวันตังอะภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตภะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามาสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสัคขะโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรภูริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภคะวะติ Okay, just a short little meditation to kind of get us ready for learning the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings. Normally with meditation, I would suggest that you do, upwards of 30 minutes or more, but, you've got to build up to that slowly. I'm not sure how long we actually meditated today, but we just kind of do a little bit of a sync here just to kind of prepare the mind. You should be doing morning, midday, and evening meditation and building up to that. So you might just be doing morning, or you might just be doing evening, or you might be doing morning and evening. So this meditation is just a short little one just before you take in some content so that you can keep the mind concentrated and focused and really allow the teachings to penetrate and soak into the mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 27 chapters and just kind of go 10 by 10. If there's any questions that people have on Facebook or YouTube, just put those into the comment section, as well as Zoom. You're welcome to put those into the comment section. Or in Zoom, you're also able to raise your hand electronically and ask your questions directly. I'm going to be switching to a view here that shows me in a small little camera and then shows the book in a really big screen, so that as we're studying the Dhamma, those people who are on live stream will be able to see the actual teachings that we're studying. And for those of you guys that have these books, you can actually be looking in the book as well when we get to a particular chapter. But what you're going to find are the teachings that I'm sharing and that Max is sharing in Zoom are updated translations, as opposed to what you're seeing in the printed books from Buddha Vajana. So I'll just turn this over to Max, because this is a study group and you guys are the study group, and I'm just here to provide guidance and insight as you have questions. and Max is kind of the one who's drawing in any questions that you guys have, and then I'm just here to kind of help you and assist you in your study group. So Max, I'll just turn things over to you and see what questions you guys have.
Okay, well, thank you, David. I was wondering if we might be able to start at the top with chapter 1. In fact, chapters 1 to 3 all have a similar message. And I have a particular question around what the Buddha is pointing to here with the criteria by which one could declare of themselves a stream enterer, which we learn, of course, that one who has abandoned the first 3 fetters would be considered a stream enterer. The Buddha here is saying something slightly different around, not necessarily different, but maybe additional to, around 4 criteria one would need to meet: having confirmed confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and also possessing virtues, deeds of the noble ones.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, David.
Yeah, this is exactly why the folks at Wat Na Pat Pong, the Buddha Vajana team, put this book together, because the first stage of enlightenment, you need to have eliminated the first 3 fetters. But in order for you to even eliminate those first 3 fetters, you would have had to learn in practice, the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, which includes a lot of meditation. You would have moved through the jhanas and now have eliminated the 3 fetters, which the Buddha talks about in this, not this particular Dhamma teaching in chapter 1, but in this particular book. You can see where he clearly explains that these 3 fetters need to be eliminated in order to reach the first stage of enlightenment. But even before you get there, you're going to be experiencing a lot of improvement to the condition of the mind on the way to get there. And what this book draws out is it does share about how the first 3 fetters need to be eliminated, but it also goes beyond that. And the Buddha is talking about a lot of other aspects of one's practice that would need to be developed in order for you to consider yourself a stream enterer. When he's talking throughout this book, and he's talking about how you can declare yourself or proclaim yourself a stream enterer, he's not talking about, putting it on your Facebook page profile and, going out and beating a drum and telling everyone that you are a stream enterer. What he's talking about is you knowing you're a stream enterer for yourself. Because if anybody's going out and declaring any attainments, then you can be sure that they probably haven't reached those attainments, because this is the ego and arrogance speaking. At no time would you ever really talk about your attainments with anyone except for your teacher. Your teacher in a private conversation, if you would like to talk about what you feel that you've attained and what things you need to focus on so that you can attain the first, second, third, or fourth stage of enlightenment, that's completely appropriate, because it's a private conversation. Your teacher's helping you and being guided to progressing to enlightenment. But be sure that you understand that whenever you see here the Buddha talking about proclaiming or declaring that you are a stream enterer, he's really talking about your own minds. These are teachings that kind of provide you some personal guidance to help you navigate and understand where you are on the path, not to declare to others, but so that you can continue to make progress. Because one of the things that people do is they kind of set their goals on attaining the first stage of enlightenment. And some people say as long as they get to the first stage of enlightenment, that's all they want to do in this lifetime. Well, I disagree with that, and the Buddha disagreed with that. While that would be a wonderful achievement for anybody to get to the first stage of enlightenment, the real goal that every single person should have is to get to the fourth stage of enlightenment as an arahant, where you're fully enlightened. But in order to get there, you got to kind of crawl, walk, run. And getting to the first stage of enlightenment is a major accomplishment. A lot of things would have to come together in terms of the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the five precepts, a really well defined and developed meditation practice, moving through the four jhanas, practicing so many aspects of the teachings just to get to that first stage of enlightenment. And once you do, and you're working with your teacher to know that you have, you should be immediately setting your sights beyond the first stage of enlightenment and not be complacent to just hang out there, because you're still going to experience rebirth in that first stage of enlightenment. Now you're going to be coming back to the human realm, but who wants to learn how to talk and read and write and their ABCs and crawling, walking, running, and going through all the problems and challenges and miseries that we experience in this human birth? If you have the option to keep on going to second, third, fourth stage of enlightenment, why not just keep going? There's no reason to be complacent and pause at this first stage of enlightenment. So what this whole book is devoted to is helping you get to that first stage, which is kind of like, crawling pretty much, or walking. And this first particular Dhamma, we can read through it, Max, if you like, or if you have certain questions about it that you would like to discuss. But this is kind of just giving you a little bit of an overview of some of the things that you've probably seen in this chapter and how they factor into what it is that you should be paying attention to. Because the Buddha is going beyond just the three fetters, and he's talking about other things that you need to be looking at in order to develop in your practice in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. And he also goes into talking about, once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, what's the benefits of having done so? He talks about this as the fruit, the fruit of stream entry. And, that would be the benefits of getting to stream entry. And he talks about that in a couple different places. But did you have any specific question related to this chapter, any of the other chapters, Max?
So if I had a specific question about this, it would be around what he's saying here, this first sentence. A noble disciple who possesses four things is a stream enterer. Does that mean that one who has confirmed confidence in the Buddha, in the teachings, in the community, and possesses virtues dear to the noble ones, does that mean that that person is going to go through, say, no more than 7 rebirths before attaining enlightenment?
No, these teachings should not be taken exclusively. So it's not like this is the one teaching, whereas if you accomplish this and only this, you are a stream enterer. There's a whole range of teachings that need to be learned and practiced, and this is just one particular teaching related to being able to become a stream enterer. So there's nowhere that the Buddha sits down and says, let me tell you everything about getting to stream entry, because that would be a multiple year conversation. And that's why, this program, the group learning program, has been a year already, and there's a lot of people that are progressing in their practice and learning. And there's never been a time where I've sat down and said, okay, let me tell you everything you need just to get to stream entry. There's a lot of pieces that you have to put together. So each one of these chapters are essentially going into various aspects that one would need in order to get to stream entry.
Righto, thank you. I have another question. Under point 4 here, the wording here is really specific, and I found that quite interesting. He says...
Are we on chapter 1, Max, or what chapter are we on?
This is chapter 2.
Oh, chapter 2, okay.
So yeah, I fallen into chapter 2 because it's very similar, but it actually bullet points these in a more concise way. So here in chapter 2.4, he says, he possesses the virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unmottled, freeing, praised by the wise, ungrasped, leading to concentration. Now, we often talk about the impermanence that occurs when we translate things from Pali into English, and add 2,500 years in between, but
Mm-hmm.
these words here seem to be very targeted. So I was interested to know your thoughts on exactly what some of these mean.
Yeah, what he's describing here in this fourth bullet is he's talking about practicing the Eightfold Path, right? Because this last part where he says leading to concentration. So the possesses the virtues dear to the noble one. The virtues are the virtuous behavior, right? The moral conduct and the wisdom and the mental discipline of the Eightfold Path. And leading to concentration, that's what the whole Eightfold Path leads to, is it leads to those four jhanas, which is concentration. So in order to even get to that point, what he's talking about here is in the first point, he's like, you got to have confidence, confirm confidence in the Buddha. Because if you never had confidence that this guy was actually enlightened, either during his lifetime or now that we're 2,500 years after, if you didn't have confidence that his teachings were useful and he was actually enlightened himself, then why would you ever even focus a moment of your time in learning and practicing what he has to share? So you've got to have that confidence, and you got to have confidence in his teachings, and you've got to have confidence in the community of people like me and ordained practitioners and other people who are practicing the teachings. You need to have confidence that this community can support and help you along the way. If you didn't have those three kind of prerequisites, why would you ever even decide to embark on any journey that's going to take you on this path and that's going to require a ton of time, effort, energy, and resources? And then once you have, and you're developing this confirmed confidence, you might not have that 100% confidence right now, but the more you learn, the more you see improvement in the condition of your mind, that confidence might expand more and more and more. But the way that you actually do that is through learning and practicing the Eightfold Path, which is what he's talking about on step number 4. And when he's talking about unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unmodeled, freeing, praised by the wise, ungrasped, here he's talking about this Eightfold Path, these teachings that are unbroken, they're untorn, like they're not contradicting each other. If you look at anything that I've shared in the book or the podcast or the classes, there's never a time where it's like, hold on, David, you said this like 3 weeks ago, and now you're saying this, and that conflicts with each other. And you're telling us we should cultivate loving kindness, but over here you're saying it's okay to talk harshly to people. That doesn't match, right? When you look at the Buddha's teachings overall, everything is in sync with each other. There's nothing that's contradicting each other. And that's what he's referring here, is that his teachings are unbroken, they're untorn, they're unblemished, right? They're not contradicting each other. The teachings are freeing. When you learn the teachings and you freeing the mind, it's not about everybody being molded into a certain way. It's about freedom of choice. It's about free will. It's about you choosing to learn and practice the teachings, not because you're scared of something that's going to happen, or not because you feel guilty if you do something wrong, but the more you learn and practice, it actually helps to free the mind. And then being praised by the wise. This is, all the people who were around him during his lifetime, and the people who weren't even practicing his teachings, like Brahmin and other householders who were learning from other teachers. Even when they got exposure to the Buddhist teachings, they still praised his teachings. Even if they weren't actively learning from him, they still were praising his teaching. And that's what he's talking about here, that his teachings are uncompromised. They're uncontradictory. They're not contradicting themselves. And they're leading to this concentration of mind.
Okay, we have a question from Biplop. I think we should cover this one off. He asks, Sir, what is the meaning of Sotapanna?
Sotapanna literally translates to stream enterer. And you'll hear people describe this also as maybe stream winner or stream winning. I use the word stream enterer because the Buddha uses the stream to talk about enlightenment. And we studied last week about the logs that are floating on the stream and going to the ocean, and how the logs get hung up either on the near shore, the far shore. They sink in the middle. They get a whirlpool. They get hung up on high ground. The idea is that once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you've entered the stream, and now your destination is the ocean. Your destination is enlightenment. Once somebody gets to the first stage of enlightenment, their mind is never going to revert back to being under or less than the first stage of enlightenment. Once you realize that these teachings are leading the mind in the direction that they are, and you get the benefits, the fruit of stream entry, you'll never be convinced to stop practicing these teachings ever, because you've met a major milestone and your mind won't revert back to or regress. And even if you die in the first stage of enlightenment, you will be reborn no more than 7 times, and you will eventually attain enlightenment. So that's why a lot of people set this as their goal, because they know if they get to the first stage of enlightenment in this life, it's either this life they will get to enlightenment or some future life, not more than 7 rebirths. But again, why go through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more rebirths? Just keep focusing on getting to enlightenment as an arahant. So Sotapanna is the first stage of enlightenment in Pali. It's the Pali word for the first stage of enlightenment.
We have a comment from Alan. I seem to recall reading once upon a time that reaching the first jhana helped attain stream entry.
Any of the jhanas are going to lead to the first stage of enlightenment. You wouldn't be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment unless you've gone through the 4 jhanas. So, you could say the same thing, Alan, about learning the 3 universal truths helps you get to the first stage of enlightenment, or learning the 4 stages, or learning the 4 noble truths helps you get to the first stage of enlightenment, or learning the Eightfold Path. It's the same thing. So all of this path, the jhanas are on the way. And once you start getting into the jhanas, that's when like everything's starting to really gel and really starting to connect together. And that's kind of like some of your first indications that things are headed in the right direction. And in order to get there, you're going to need to be able to learn and practice the teachings very closely and have personal guidance to be able to do that. You wouldn't just mistakenly get to, by accident, trip over the first jhana. You would need to be really active in the role of learning and practicing to get there. And then all of this on the path is leading to enlightenment. So yeah, the first jhana is on the path to the first stage of enlightenment.
Okay, now the next several chapters all relate to dependent origination, so I'd encourage anyone who has any questions on that to post questions around dependent origination. But David, perhaps we can cover that generally, because it's such a prominent part of the first half of this book, really. And
which
I'll
chapter?
Just go to the next chapter. I had one specific question, but I'd like to open it up to everybody just to see if anyone has any questions around dependent origination at all.
What chapter are you looking at, Max?
So I'm now going to chapter 5.
Okay.
And so in chapter 5, he first talks about the 5 precepts, and then he goes on to talk about dependent origination.
Okay. Did you have a specific question, or should we just discuss it in general?
So I do have a question, but I think it'd be interesting just to get a general discussion of what dependent origination is.
Okay.
And maybe some more questions will arise.
Okay. So everything related to Gotama Buddha's teachings is all about cause and effect, or action and result. Essentially the result of our decisions, this natural law of karma. Dependent origination is essentially describing a cause and effect chain of events that have led to your continuous rebirth in the cycle of rebirth. And starting with birth, moving through step by step, and going all the way to ignorance. And then when he's talking about extinguishing birth, he goes backwards. He starts at ignorance and then he goes backwards to get to the point where you're extinguishing birth. Because as we've talked in other classes, the problem that you're trying to solve on this path is the discontent mind. You're trying to eliminate the discontent mind, painful feelings, pleasant feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, to get to this peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. And having done so, through all the teachings that you're learning and practicing, your mind will reside peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. And then having done so, you actually have now solved the major problem that you're actually facing, which is the cycle of rebirth. You're constantly being reborn over and over and over again, and this is why you keep going through these miseries over and over and over again, because you haven't yet figured out how to train the mind, train the consciousness, and escape this whole cycle. And while you may not remember births that you've had previous to this one, you have had many, many births. And as the mind awakens, you may actually observe these past lives. Some people do, some people don't. And what dependent origination is doing is just showing you that cause and effect, that causal relationship from one thing to the next to the next. In terms of what you need to know with dependent origination is, of course, the more you understand the Buddhist teachings and the more you understand each individual aspect of dependent origination, where the Buddha is talking about going from ignorance to volitional activities or volitional formations, to consciousness, to name and form, the six sense bases, or the six sense faculties is what we also call them. Contact, physical contact, feelings in the mind, craving. Then he talks about clinging. And then I translate this to existence. A lot of times you'll see this translated as being, B-E-I-N-G, but existence is kind of a better translation there, I feel. And then birth. And then that leads to old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, anguish. Essentially, the Buddha's sharing here that birth, because of birth, that's why we're experiencing the misery that we're experiencing. So the real problem that we're trying to solve is this cycle of rebirth and escaping this cycle of rebirth. And this series of events through dependent origination is just showing you the individual pieces that one leads to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And while learning each one of these and maybe memorize them if you want, I actually don't have them 100% memorized, and you don't really necessarily need to. The thing to take away from dependent origination is that every cause has an effect. Every action has a result, essentially the natural law of karma. And the other thing to take away from dependent origination is that if there is birth, then there's going to be this anguish, this misery, this pain because of these various chain of events. And the other aspect of dependent origination to understand is the ignorance aspect, that it's the ignorance that is the condition that keeps this whole dependent origination being fueled, right? By continuing to be ignorant of craving, desire, attachment, hatred, anger, ill will, of delusion, ignorance, and unknowing of true reality. This is what's keeping the mind in continued existence continuing. So all of this existence is essentially dependent on ignorance. Once we learn and practice the teachings, independently verifying those, training the mind to become wise and having this wisdom, getting to enlightenment, i.e., we've eradicated ignorance. Once you've done that, and all the other eradication of the mind that you need to eradicate, you will have eliminated birth, and you no longer will experience continuous rebirth. So the individual steps themselves, if you would like to memorize them, you can, but you wouldn't necessarily need to know every single one in memory because you've got it right here. The other thing to take away from dependent origination is you see right in the middle of dependent origination is the 6 sense bases, right? The eyes, the nose, the tongue, the ears, physical contact, and the mind. These are the 5 normal senses that you've always learned, and then the 6th sense is the mind. Once there's contact through any of these 6 sense bases, that's what's also causing the mind to be discontent. It's the mind craving, having this longing with a strong eagerness through these 6 sense bases. And these feelings that are being generated, the painful feelings, pleasant feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, are all coming about because of this craving, because of these 6 sense bases. The mind is just craving pleasant feelings through all of these 6 sense bases. And when the mind experiences something disagreeable through these 6 sense bases, that's when the mind experiences painful feelings. When the mind experiences something agreeable through these 6 sense bases, that's when it experiences pleasant feelings. When the mind kind of doesn't know what it wants, that's when it usually will experience the neither painful nor pleasant feelings. But that's not always true. But this dependent origination is just helping you see this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. That there's this whole series of activities that are happening, and this is the result of ignorance.
Thanks, David. That's very interesting. So, whilst we tend to target craving as the primary problem in the mind, what we're getting to ultimately is eliminating the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. So is it right to say then that the path is in some ways about coming to know true reality, and that by seeing things clearly, we are removing the cause for the rest of the chain to happen? So by removing the unknowing, we then remove the volitional activities, and by removing those, we ultimately eliminate consciousness, and so on down the chain.
Exactly, Max. That the mind, before you were ever on this path to enlightenment, you were experiencing sadness, anger, frustration, happiness, excitement, boredom, loneliness, shyness, and you had no idea why. You were just experiencing all of this. You just thought that was part of the human condition, and you thought that you would always need to just live that way. And you might not have liked the anger. You might have blamed it on other people, or, you just kind of were roaming around unaware, ignorant to what was really happening in the mind. And it's not until you eradicate and work on this major poison of ignorance or unknowing of true reality, and by seeing true reality, that unbinds the whole chain. This whole dependent origination, it unwinds it, it unbounds it. So this is why wisdom, the mind is liberated by wisdom, because wisdom is the antidote to this ignorance. And while the primary problem that's causing the mind to be discontent is craving, desire, attachment, the primary problem that's keeping the mind in the unenlightened state is delusion, ignorance, unknowing of true reality. It's this unknowing of all of these teachings. And the more you learn about them, the more you practice them and you see the truth for yourself and you see things clearly, then you will be able to function in the world peacefully. Because in the unenlightened mind, we don't understand these natural laws of existence. We don't understand what we don't understand. And we walk around aimlessly, using alcohol, lying to people, talking harshly, getting angry, partying, uh, uh, maybe hitting people, maybe gossiping about people. We go around doing all of these things aimlessly, not realizing that we're actually causing all this harm to ourselves. We get all these problems in our life and we just blame everyone else because we're ignorant, we're unknowing of true reality. We don't understand these natural laws of existence. And as you learn these natural laws of existence from the Buddha, the mind becomes more and more wise with this wisdom. You eradicate this ignorance, and then this whole chain of events unravels. And this is the same thing you did when we talk about like the natural law of gravity. At one time, you were ignorant to the natural law of gravity, and things kept falling, and you kept falling, and you kept hurting yourself, and you kept falling off a bike, and you kept struggling and having miserable time. You had anguish because of this chain of events, because your mind was ignorant to the natural law of gravity. And once you got the wisdom to understand that natural law of gravity, then you unwound all of that anguish, that now you place your nice objects in a certain place, you put your glass of water in a certain place, you ensure that you keep certain things that you're trying to keep nice in a certain place, you take care of things in a different way. And when you walk down the street, you walk consciously and you're aware of how you walk so that you don't fall down. You're aware of the sidewalk if it's different size or space. And because of this wisdom you have of the natural law of gravity, you can now roam about the world in a more peaceful way, in a way that doesn't cause any harm to you or cause harm to other people. But this natural law of karma and all these other natural laws of existence, they're not as easy to understand, because when with gravity, you can see it. You can see, this is dropping. You can see that, and you can figure it out kind of on your own over the course of your life through trial and error. But you can't really figure out the natural laws of existence through trial and error. You're not gossiping and you're not seeing how that's affecting you because it's not immediate. The natural law of gravity is immediate. You can see it right away. It's instant. But the natural law of karma doesn't work that way. Oftentimes it's very slow. So the mind doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. So the Buddha was able to see these natural laws of existence very clearly with his awakened mind, and he figured out all of these natural laws of existence. And that's what he dedicated 45 years of his life to, of laying out the teachings that will help you to see more and more clearly the natural laws of existence. And when you see those teachings and you understand them, you don't believe them, you absorb them, and then you go practice, because it's a natural law. And because it's a natural law, you can independently verify the truth for yourself. The gravity, you can verify that right here, right now, right? But with the natural laws of existence, i.e., stop gossiping, stop lying, stop taking intoxicants, some of these things, it's going to take you a little bit more time to figure out. But the Buddha is essentially giving you a manual of, hey, this is what the natural law of karma is all about. And it's quite complex. That's why there's so many teachings, and it takes you so many years to learn it. But that's also why you need a guide. You need a tour guide, a teacher to point the way and show you the way of this natural law of karma. And as you do, gradually, slowly, the mind becomes more and more wise. Just like you did when you were an infant, the mind gradually became more aware of the natural law of gravity. And probably since the age of 12 or 14, maybe 16, you haven't fallen down and hurt yourself and got a boo-boo on your knee. But it took you 12, 14, 16 years to really figure out the natural law of gravity. Even though you can see it, it still took you 12, 14, 16 years to figure out how to walk and run without hurting yourself. And now that you figure that out, you've got that as wisdom. So the natural law of karma, you can see it more and more clearly. And this is one of the reasons why I'm updating these translations, so that you can get more clear guidance on what these teachings are, so you can see it more and more clearly. But it's ignorance that keeps everything bound up, because without this kind of instruction manual, this guide of the natural laws of existence, you would continue to be ignorant, walking around blaming others for you getting angry. And as long as you kept doing that, you would keep getting angry, because the problem isn't other people. The problem is your own mind. And it's not until you start learning and practicing these, gaining exposure, seeking guidance, independently confirming the teachings for yourself, that you start getting wisdom. And this is what unravels this whole dependent origination, because you start eradicating ignorance.
Right, so is this why that sometimes we just need to resolve an attachment by doing it and seeing it clearly, and seeing how we're causing our own discontent mind through that? Or how sometimes we just have to bear the results of our karma and understand what we did that led up to this, in order to see the natural law of karma in action, and therefore be able to let that thing go and stop doing that thing ultimately that led to that situation.
Right. And this is why when I mention anytime your mind's discontent, that's the red light, that's the dashboard that's indicating to you something's wrong here. There's craving, desire, attachment somewhere. And once you identify what that is and you eradicate that, then the mind will no longer experience discontentedness based on that. But like you're talking about, sometimes you have to fulfill these attachments. If you have the craving to go to the Philippines, like I always use as an example, sometimes you just have to go, and then you realize, that didn't make my mind peaceful. I mean, I enjoyed it, I had a good time, it was pleasant, I enjoyed the food, but my mind's still angry at certain things. My mind's still frustrated at certain things. My mind is still discontent. It's still shy. It wasn't that outward searching for satisfaction to go to the Philippines. That wasn't the one thing that you needed in order to solve all the problems that you're facing in your life. What you needed is to realize that it's this craving that's driving you to search externally for satisfaction. And the only way that you're going to understand that is if you eradicate this ignorance.
Okay, perhaps I can just ask another one to dissect this a little bit here, because there's some really interesting points in this. So, with craving as condition, he says.
Where are you at, so I can make sure that online...
Okay, I'm on page 8 now.
Page 8.
Which is chapter 5.
With craving as condition.
Okay, so let me rephrase. Actually, the bit I meant to read was this. So, with feeling as condition, craving. In other words, when feeling arises, craving comes to be.
I think the paragraph you're looking at is he's talking backwards, because he's talking about the cessation. When he talks about the cessation, he starts with ignorance and he works backwards. When he's talking about the development or how it leads to, he will start with birth. So it's actually craving that leads to feeling.
So he's not saying that all feelings will produce craving.
No, it's the opposite. The paragraph that I think you're looking at is he's talking about the cessation. So do you see the paragraph where it says, when this exists, that comes to be? With the arising of this, that arises?
Yeah.
That's where you're at, right? The paragraph below that? Okay.
I'm looking at the paragraph below that, yeah.
Okay. So here, notice that he's saying, when that does not come to be, with the cessation of this, that ceases. So now he's talking about cessation. He's talking about the elimination of discontentedness, which is what he gets to at the very end of that next paragraph, where he says, such is the cause of this whole mass of discontentedness.
I'm not seeing that in this paragraph.
Let me look at Zoom where you're at. Yes, you're on it. So look at the last sentence of that paragraph that you have highlighted.
Such is the cause of this whole mass of discontentedness.
Right. So what he's doing is he's saying ignorance is the condition that leads to this whole mass of discontentedness. So it's craving, desire, attachment, which is the cause of discontentedness. But it's the condition of craving that keeps the mind in the unenlightened state and continuing to experience this discontentedness. He's just breaking it down bit by bit by bit by bit so you can see the granular level of how ignorance gets to discontentedness. But here he's talking about the cessation of it. When he talks about the cessation of it, he's going to start with ignorance and he's going to end up with birth or discontentedness. But when he talks about the cause, he's going to flip it. And that's where you can see that craving leads to feelings.
Right.
There's some other places here that we can look at it where he's flipped it.
This bit here where he says with feeling as condition, craving, what does he mean there?
Where feelings as condition, craving. So here he's saying, he's reverting backwards. So feelings are, we're looking at it backwards. Let's find a place where it's going to make more sense for you guys. Let me find a place. Let me use my search. Let's see. Let's do a search.
So I think we might be spoiled for choice here, but there's quite a nice one in chapter 14.
Chapter 14. Okay, that's where I just got to now. Okay. He's still talking about it backwards here, but what I would consider backwards, because he's talking about the cessation, right? Because that's what his whole teachings are about, is the cessation of discontentedness, right? He's not talking about how to create discontentedness. He wants to teach you how to eliminate it. So here what he's talking about in chapter 14 is a stream enter understands condition, the causes, the cessation, and the way leading to the cessation of condition. Because that's his whole focus, is the Four Noble Truths, is the cessation of all of this stuff, right? So here he says, bhikkhus, with ignorance as condition, that leads to volitional formations. So ignorance, the unknowing of true reality, leads to volitional formations, which are choices about your life, choices about the future, choices about things that you're doing. So essentially, choices come to be. With choices, there's consciousness, the awareness of mind, right? That's with choices as conditions, the consciousness. And now with consciousness, name and form. This is where you're actually naming something, right? And then from there, it goes to the six sense bases, the six sense faculties. And now contact through these six sense bases, there's the feelings, right? But then it's the cravings after feelings that the cravings is what's creating the feelings. It's not the feelings that are creating the cravings. It's the other way around, right? And then clinging, and then existence, and then birth. And then all of that is aging, death, sorrow, elimination, pain. So if you want to think about this in more of a way that I think that people's minds will understand, is if you think about you were born, and then because you were born, you have existence. And now because you exist, there's clinging and craving, this outward searching for satisfaction, this mental longing with a strong eagerness. that leads to painful feelings, pleasant feelings, feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. And there's contact associated with that, contact through the six sense bases. And we name this in certain forms, and it affects the consciousness. And then we make certain choices based on that. And if there's ignorance there, then our decisions are made through ignorance. So I think it helps if you start at the bottom and you go to the top rather than walking it backwards.
I'm going to ask a question from Biplog. He asks, ignorance with conditions. Please explain about conditions.
Okay, so a condition are things that exist in the mind that aren't true, essentially. So, like I gave an example in last Wednesday's talk where, like, if somebody had a neighbor move in across the street and that neighbor had tattoos and this person's mind was conditioned, it was given conditions where the mind, maybe the parents or the grandparents or the friends or family, taught this person that anyone who has tattoos is a bad person, or anyone who has tattoos uses drugs, is in a gang, has weapons. These are conditions that are in the mind. And it's these conditions that aren't true that the mind is ignorant. The mind is unknowing of true reality. So now, because of these conditions, the mind has been conditioned in a certain way. It is now shaping its decisions through this ignorance. And now you're not able to have a open, peaceful, loving, caring relationship with your neighbor just because your mind is conditioned with this ignorance to think that everyone with a tattoo is a bad person.
Okay, so we have a number of questions about chapter 14, so
Okay.
let's make a go of those. We have a question from Amina. We have two questions, in fact. Good morning, all. Grateful for these classes. Thank you, Amina. Grateful for you as well. Would like to ask two questions from chapter 14. So one, and what, bhikkhus, is name and form? Feeling, perception, volition, contact, attention. This is called name. The four great elements and the form derived from the four great elements. This is called form. Thus, this name and this form are together called name and form. So Amina's question is the form being compared to the attention we give to form?
No, here the form is physical form. So when he's talking about the four great elements, he's talking about earth, wind, fire, and water. Okay? Everything comes down to those four elements. And everything that we're looking at, everything that we see, the form, the physical form, can be described through these four elements. And if you want to go into those in more detail, we can talk about those in more detail and how that manifests. But physical form all comes down to these four great elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. That's what form is, the physical form. And the name he's talking about here is essentially where you give it a name. You know, that's a cell phone, right? There's a certain form here that's based on the four elements, but then it gets a name. Same thing like the physical body, right? And what we're talking about here since we're talking about dependent origination, he's talking about us as individuals, as the human being, right? So this physical body, this form, is made up of four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. And then because there is form, this physical form of these four elements, then it gets a name, David. So now there's name and form. There's physical form and there's a name, David. And this is also where he's talking about the five aggregates, right? So feeling, perception, volitional formations, contact, in consciousness. He's actually, these aren't the entire five aggregates, but he's kind of discussing those a little bit as name, right? I might have to look at this a little bit closer, but this is what name is, right? Because the human being is coming together and being described as name and form. These four elements and these five aggregates.
Okay, we have another question from Amina referring to this sentence. With the arising of the six sense bases, there is the arising of contact. With the cessation of the six sense bases, there is the cessation of contact. Amina's question is, when we neutralize our senses, we no longer feel the contact from our six sense bases?
I'm not sure that I understand the question 100%, but the part that you need to practice in order to progress on this path is to understand that discontentedness comes through these six sense bases. And you need to guard these six sense bases and realize that the mind's going to have craving through these six sense bases, and it's going to be chasing after the pleasant feelings. And when it gets what it wants, something agreeable, it's going to experience those pleasant feelings, and that's discontentedness. And when it doesn't get what it wants, it's going to experience the painful feelings, the disagreeable. So the Buddha talks about guarding these six sense bases. And there was a simile in the previous book about the tortoise, the simile of the tortoise, where the tortoise extends its limbs. And the Buddha's talking about pulling the limbs in. And what he's talking about here is pulling the six sense bases in so that you're not affected by the contact of these six sense bases. That you smell a nice smell, but rather than allow the mind to be like, oh wow, that smells so wonderful. Oh my goodness, that is such a great smell. Did you smell that? Right? This is the pleasant feelings coming in. And if you allow the mind to do that, then when you walk past an odor that is disagreeable, now you're, oh my goodness, that's horrible. Did you smell that? That is just so horrible. Where an enlightened mind isn't going to be affected by the pleasant smell, and it's not going to be affected by the horrible smell or what the mind thinks of as a horrible smell. It's just going to be smell. It's just going to be an odor. And the mind's not going to be affected either with pleasant feelings or painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant, based on this sense of the smell. And what the Buddha is talking about here is helping you see very clearly how these six sense bases are part of this whole stream of discontentedness that starts with ignorance. It ends, or flipped over, it starts with ignorance and ends with discontentedness. But in the middle there is these six sense bases, which is part of the problem with this physical body, that when we take name and form, when we have this name and form, now we've got these six sense bases. And because we have these six sense bases, the consciousness, the mind, is going to want to pursue these feelings of pleasant feelings. Therefore, it's going to experience painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant as well. But I'm not sure I understand about your question about if there's no contact, something else. I'm not sure I understand that.
Okay, let's go to a question from Alan. So Alan has a question about this part. There are three kinds of existence: sense sphere existence, form sphere existence, formless sphere existence. This is called existence. Alan is asking what the Buddha means about this.
Okay, let me get to this part.
So I'm on page 24.
Mine doesn't have page numbers, Max.
Okay, I have to find another way to navigate.
Well, I'll need...
So it's chapter 14.
Yeah, I've got it now, existence, right?
Apologies, I've jumped to 15, but it's actually in chapter 14 as well.
Okay, so let me just go to the exact same spot where you're at.
Yeah.
just
So
to
it
make
is
sure.
in chapter 14 as well, second page of chapter 14.
Okay.
And what bhikkhu is existence?
So what's Alan's question?
Alan asks, it isn't clear to me what this means.
Sense, form. Okay. So these three existences, there's sense existence, which is the six senses. There's form, which is physical form, which is the human realm and the animal realm. That's where there's physical form. And then there's the formless realm or formless existences, which are the hell, afflicted spirits, and heavenly realm. So these are the existences. And what I'm learning here, since this is the first time that I'm teaching this, is the words that aren't working for you guys. So now that I see that you guys aren't understanding this word sphere, what this should be is it should be realm. For formless form realm existence, formless realm existence. This sense sphere is just the senses that we experience in the form realm. In the human realm and in the animal realm, we have these six senses. I'm not sure if the hell, afflicted spirits, and heavenly realm have all six senses or not, but definitely in the form realm, we've got all six.
Is that also what the Buddha is referring to under aging and death, David, where he talks about the various beings in the various orders of beings? Or is he referring to something else there? Orders of beings.
Orders of beings are the realms, yes, when he's referring to orders of beings.
Okay. So that appears to be all our questions on chapter 14. We're now going to go to chapter 15.
Okay.
We have a question from Judith. Is consciousness the same as perception?
No, it's not. Consciousness is the mind. Perceptions are how the mind looks at external things and oftentimes assumes one thing versus another. So they're two different things.
Okay. Next up is, I had a question on 18 and 19.
Okay.
So I was just looking for a general overview of this chapter. I think perhaps we can just look at chapter 18.
Okay. Let me just refresh since I don't have each chapter memorized. Wisdom of the principle, wisdom entailment. This is still going through dependent origination.
In particular, I think on chapter 18, I was looking to understand who is accomplished in view.
Accomplished in
yeah, what does that mean?
Accomplished in view is eradication of ignorance. Because in order to establish view, you're going to have to get more and more wisdom, right? So that's why it says who is accomplished in view, who is accomplished in vision. That means like seeing things clearly, being able to see things clearly. So if you go back to kind of what we talk about as basic, kind of like right view, which is the Four Noble Truths, that's like basic right view. But as you progress and you eradicate more and more ignorance, then you see more clearly and you have more and more view or more and more vision. So that's why he's talking about who is accomplished in view, meaning essentially the opposite of, or the same thing of that is one who has accumulated lots and lots of wisdom.
Okay, I would actually like to ask about the start of chapter 19 as well, so I wasn't sure what he meant here. I'll read out this paragraph. Bhikkhus, when what exists, by clinging to what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? The winds do not blow, the rivers do not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon and sun do not rise and set, but stand as steady as a pillar.
Yeah. So what he will often do when he's trying to convince somebody of what his actual teachings are, he will say something that's completely opposite of his teachings first. And that's essentially what he's doing here. Is he's setting up what he's about to teach as kind of saying the opposite. What he's saying is bhikkhus, when what exists by clinging to what, by adhering to what, does such a view as this arise? So by clinging to things, the wind does not blow, the rivers do not flow, pregnant women do not give birth, the moon and sun do not rise and set, but stand as steady as a pillar. So the mind is still, actually, hold on, I'm sorry, let me back up. Our teachings are rooted in the perfect light. When I take a course, it would be good if the perfect light would clear up the meaning. Okay, so yeah, so he's basically laying out what isn't true first in that first paragraph, and then he's talking about later what is true.
All right.
So sometimes he kind of, like I mentioned at the beginning, he's going to say what isn't true first, and then he's going to tell you what is true.
He then goes on to say, when there is form, bhikkhus by clinging to form, and then such a view as this arises, and then repeats that statement.
It's a way. It's a way of actually having you teach yourself, because
right.
What he's doing is he's not giving you anything to believe. He's giving you something to think about and reflect on and contemplate, and come to a conclusion for yourself. So he's not always telling you exactly what he would like you to know. He's leading you to the answer by giving you kind of the wrong answer, and then allowing you to do the deduction, allowing you to do the reflection and kind of figure it out on your own.
All right, got it. Thank you, David. Okay, we're going to go to chapter 20 next, and a question from Judith. So the chapter is called A Stream Enterer Has Abandoned Perplexity in the Case of Nothing Matters. Judith has a very specific question about this, and she's asking what the Buddha means by giving is a doctrine of fools. And I'm just going to find that in context and see where he says that.
Yeah, I remember that. I had a feeling someone was going to ask about that. Let me use my little search to find it too.
Yeah, my Adobe isn't finding that, so I'll look for it manually.
It's at the end of the first paragraph, Max.
Right.
I'm just going to refresh my memory here. For men with support for the body, carried away in the corpse, the funeral perception, the funeral speech lasts for burnt offerings end with ashes. Giving is a doctrine of unwise. When anyone asserts the doctrine that there is giving and the like, it is empty, false, and frivolous. Unwise and the wise are alike cut off and perish with the breakup of the body. After death, they do not exist. The thing that I think he's sharing here, although it's not very clear, and I might need to go back and kind of work this a little bit closer, is I think what he's saying is the idea that giving is unwise is not the true teachings, is not, it's empty, it's false, it's frivolous speech, is I think what he's essentially getting to. Is he's basically saying, because he says so clearly in so many other teachings about how generosity and giving and sharing is part of the path. I think here what he's saying is he's sharing how if somebody has the doctrine of not giving, it would be unwise.
The title of this chapter is quite interesting. A stream enterer has abandoned perplexity in the case of nothing matters.
Yeah, I was looking at that too.
Message of this, David.
Yeah, that this is a title that came up from the Buddha Vajrayana folks. I remember reading through this when I was doing the edits, but I don't recall 100% of what it was all about. But yeah, I'm not sure why they named it that.
I'd like to ask just a question, maybe just get your view generally, David, because this is an interesting point. Does nothing matter, right? Are we, by awakening the mind, coming to the point where obviously we're completely content no matter what happens? Is that the same as saying that nothing matters? Things matter?
Things do matter, right? It does matter. Things do matter. I think this is why I need to spend time, and I'm glad that I'm teaching this with you guys, because when I go through this, things make sense to me, but to have to explain it to somebody helps me to figure out what are the right words to explain it to you guys. And seeing the things that you guys are struggling with actually helps me to be able to go back through here and kind of refine the language a bit to ensure that it is that you guys are gaining what it is that you need to gain. Because yes, things do matter, but in terms of once your mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, nothing's going to bother the mind. And maybe that's what they're getting to, because what we're looking at here is we've got these translations that have been handed down for 2,500 years, okay? For 2,500 years, these translations have been handed down, and it's amazing. We've got even the amount of clarity that we do have in certain places. This particular book doesn't have as much things to bite off as a lot of the other books, but it's amazing we've got as much clarity as we've got. And these printed books have some language that I don't necessarily agree with 100%. And that's why I'm taking the time to scan these in page by page by page by page, and then modify and update the translations. Because not only do we have these 2,500 years of translations that have been passed down, but we've also got a group of Thai people who have accumulated these teachings and now put them together in a book and assign titles. And their English isn't their first language. So what you're seeing here is not really succinct and perfect, right? Because of impermanence. We've got this 2,500 years of impermanence from the moment the Buddha spoke any of these teachings till it lived for 45 years, to it finally got written down at some point, and it's been handed down, translated and everything. And then the Thai people get it, and they kind of put it together and start assigning titles, and their English isn't as up to what we would maybe speak in as a native speaker. So what I'm attempting to do here is teach you guys based on what we have, but updating it and making it better. So this first time through this program, since I didn't write these books, this first time through, I'm doing a lot of work in the background to update the translations. And then each one of these classes that we have, I'm then going back and updating them some more based on the questions that you guys have. I suspect that the second or third time that I teach from these Buddha Vajrayana books, it's going to be more and more refined. And you guys are kind of part of that process of helping to do that. So repeating this program will be helpful. and then also the work that you guys are doing here on your own to feed in the kind of questions that you're having, it's helping people in the future because it's allowing me to go in and actually ensure that we've got better language that's going to connect with the student in a better way. As you saw through the group learning program, when the text and all the resources were completely from me, everything completely flowed and I understood and we can teach it and everything is very seamless. But that's because it's all coming from me. This particular books are being patched together by a lot of different people. And now what I'm doing in the background is trying to kind of massage it a bit and make it word as if it's coming from one person, but it's not quite there yet. And what you guys are seeing is just not quite there. So, we're going to kind of stumble a little bit here until we get to kind of a more stable translation, which is what I'm working on in the background. And also I will also add to that is I think out of all the books, this particular book is one of the more challenging ones to learn from because of the dependent origination, and because dependent origination is not only a complex topic, but it's also what you're reading is from lots of different authors. So what one person is calling one thing in one chapter, somebody else is using a different word, and it makes it very challenging to understand. And that's one of the reasons why I'm also going through this and kind of massaging it so that we get the same word usage all the way through all the chapters.
Okay, so we have a question from Amina, who's also looking for some teaching on this. She's asking what the Buddha means by this sentence. There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented in charity, no fruit or result of good and bad actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father.
You'll have to let me know where that is, but it sounds like he's once again saying what's not true. He's saying what's not true, but where is that exactly, Max? It's in this chapter?
Right at the start of chapter 20, and he's talking about this by clinging to what does such a view as this arise.
Yes. So he's basically describing ignorance here. He's basically describing like this isn't true. Yeah, and by clinging or craving or having desire, this whole mass of discontentedness, the mind is muddled and unclear, and the mind thinks that this view of there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing presented to charity, no fruit or result, good or bad actions, no this world, meaning the human world, no the other world, meaning all the other realms. There is no mother, there is no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no aesthetics, no Brahmins. He's basically saying like all these things don't exist, but that's not what he's teaching. He's basically sharing like this is kind of like a silly view, right? And if you read some of the stuff that I write in the Facebook group, like the post I just made about bodhisattvas versus arahants, I kind of like lay out a case and saying, well, if bodhisattvas are true, and that's the true reality, what we would expect to see in the world is the condition of the world would be getting better and better and better. Is that what we see? Right? So one of the ways to lead somebody to understanding the truth is to present the false truth and then kind of invite them to reflect on that and see the truth for themselves.
Okay, let's go to the next chapter now. So this is a much shorter, more concise chapter. 6 benefits in realizing the fruit of stream entry.
Yeah, this one's much more straightforward.
Yeah, quite clear this one. No opposites or questions here.
Just give it to us. What's 6?
Bullet points. Yeah. And so Alan has a question. What is the difference between bullets 5 and 6? So bullet 5 is, and this is as part of the 6 benefits of realizing the fruit of stream entry. Point 5 is one has clearly seen causation. And point 6 is one has clearly seen causally arisen objects.
Okay, to me, what I think this is sharing is causation is cause and effect, action and result, the natural law of Gama, what we would call the natural law of Gama. One who has clearly seen causation arisen objects, that's dependent origination. Okay, the titles that we're using, the Buddha didn't necessarily use. Like when I talk about the 3 universal truths, that title of the 3 universal truths, the Buddha never used that. That's how we're describing his teachings now, looking back about what he taught. This dependent origination, I'm not sure if he used that word or not. I'd have to look more closely, but he used these other words, and we came up with titles to kind of classify and categorize his teachings. So to me, what he's describing in 5 is the natural law of Gama. One has clearly seen causation, cause and effect, action and result, essentially the result of your decisions. One has clearly seen causally arisen objects. This is birth, leads to this, leads to that, leads to the 6 sense bases, what we just went through, consciousness, ultimately to ignorance. So that's the dependent origination. So someone would have to see that clearly and understand it.
So all of these points are interesting, but number 2 here, one is incapable of decline. What do you think he meant by this, David? Because
this is what I was talking about, that
one's still going to have...
This is what I was talking about. Once you attain stream entry, the mind won't revert back to the 2nd jhana, for example. But as you're progressing in your practice, having not gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, if you're anywhere below that, your mind can revert. It's not permanent. So the 1st jhana is not permanent. The 2nd jhana is not permanent. The 3rd and the 4th, they're not permanent. Your mind can revert backwards. And what he's saying here in the 2nd bullet point is once you attain stream entry, one of the benefits is that it's incapable for the mind to decline and revert backwards.
Right, so there will still be some lingering habits, right?
You're still going to have craving, anger, and ignorance because you've only eliminated 3 fetters. You're still going to have discontentedness. You can see here, number 3. But the discontentedness is limited. It's come down a bit. But there's still central desire, which hasn't even been thinned at that point. So there's going to be discontentedness. There's still ill will, right? There's still arrogance and ego and all these other things are still there. So you've attain the first stage of enlightenment, but you won't decline backwards off of that. Your discontentedness is limited, but you're still experiencing discontentedness.
Okay, thank you.
In that first one, Max, the one that says one is fixed in the good teachings, at that point, by the time you get to stream entry, because you've gone through the 4 jhanas, that the Eightfold Path and all the other teachings and meditation have led you to much deeper awareness of the mind. And at that point, your mind's fixed on these teachings. You have confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. You're experiencing a lot more awareness. You are experiencing benefits because the discontentedness has shrunk significantly. It's limited. So you're fixed in these good teachings. Like, this is the path to enlightenment, and you're on that path. And it's just a matter of continuing to learn and practice to get to enlightenment. So that's kind of like knowing that these teachings are for sure the ones that are going to lead you to enlightenment.
Okay, we next have a question around chapter 22.
Okay.
entitled "A Stream Enterer is Worth More Than Being a Wheel-Turning Monarch." So Alan has a specific question on this. The Buddha here refers to the four continents. Alan's question is, what are the four continents?
I suspect that they didn't have either awareness of the seven continents that we're aware of, um, um, because this is sovereign rulership over the four continents. This is what a wheel turning monarch is. I thought that was going to be the question because when I was editing this, I was like, someone's for sure going to ask, what is a wheel turning monarch? So let me explain what a wheel turning monarch is. A wheel turning monarch is a ruler or a king, someone who's ruling over a particular kingdom that has decided to learn and practice the Buddhist teachings, and they essentially guide their kingdom based on the Dhamma, based on the Buddhist teachings. And they essentially implement policies, procedures, things for their kingdom based on the Dhamma. So that's what a wheel turning monarch is, someone who is essentially in a position of power to influence large, massive numbers of people to learn and practice the teachings, to help them on the path to enlightenment. So, ruling over the four continents, we're talking about land. We're talking about what we know today as the seven continents. It looks like during the Buddha's lifetime, they were only aware of four of them.
Maybe they divided them differently or something.
I don't know that the whole world was explored and that those were, and that exploration got back to the Buddha, right? Because even people in England in the 1700s didn't know about what we call America today. So that was all new to them. So it makes sense that during the lifetime 2,500 years ago, that they didn't know of all these different continents around the world.
Okay, I have a question around chapter 24, entitled "Six Cases of Incapability by One Accomplished in View."
Okay.
So the Buddha is talking about six things that one accomplished in view would be incapable of.
Yes.
Now, I notice here that the first three of these pertain to the three universal truths. And I'm interested to know, David, exactly what do you think he means by view here, given that one who had abandoned the first three fetters would still have sensual desire. So they'd still do things they found pleasurable, even though they would not consider them permanent, they wouldn't consider them pleasurable, and they would have realized non-self, so they wouldn't consider anything to be a self. So someone is accomplished in view. I interpret this as they have the view that this thing is not permanent, and so on some level they understand and they've realized it and they've seen the truth of that, even though this lingering tendency to do those things might still be there to some degree. And so, at this point they're kind of ebbing and flowing towards abandoning those. But there's got to be some kind of grey area between seeing it, having it as a view and understanding it, to completely abandoning that tendency altogether, having just got absolutely no desire to do anything that could do any harm or that might result in some kind of addiction or even any sense of the self.
Yeah, what he's saying is someone who's accomplished in view understands that all these conditioned objects or phenomenon are impermanent, right? They understand that everything's impermanent. They understand the first universal truth. They understand the second universal truth, which is all these conditioned things are causing these feelings of painful, pleasant, neither painful nor pleasant. And the mind understands this self, right? This phenomenon of self. So, like you said, even though they're not practicing fully to get to the point of having attained enlightenment, they at least understand at this point. Someone who is a stream entry, or he's not talking about stream entry here, he's just talking about accomplished in view. Someone who's accomplished in view will deeply understand the three universal truths, which is what the first three are talking about. And that's why I start out all of my talks with brand new students with the three universal truths and the four noble truths, because in order to get to right view and all the rest of the path, you need to understand those very clearly and be practicing them more and more and more. But here it's just like, are you at a point, or anyone else who's in the class right now, like, you should be at a point, hopefully, that you know that you are in fact causing all the feelings in your mind. If you're not at that point yet, then you just haven't accomplished, you're not accomplished in view yet. If you're still blaming others for your anger, your sadness, or your frustration, or your happiness, your excitement, your elation, if you're saying other people are causing this, or the situation is causing it, then you're not yet accomplished in view, because you're not yet seeing clearly that it's.
What do you think he means here in point 4? So, one accomplished in view is incapable of doing a grave act that brings immediate results. What does he mean by grave act, and what does he mean by immediate results?
Yeah, this is things like breaking the 5 precepts. Those typically will have immediate results. If you kill another being, there's immediate result. If you steal, or sexual misconduct, if you lie, if you take substances that cause heedlessness, these are grave acts. These are things that are really basic and have immediate consequences.
Right, so incapable of doing anything that would bring about an immediate negative consequence.
Right.
Or even an undesirable consequence. But sometimes we do things because we want an immediate desirable consequence, and that then has long-term implications, whether it's getting into debt, whether it's eating a gigantic piece of cake because we really, really crave it, only to bring about some problem later. And could it also mean that? Is it that one would be incapable of doing something out of pure impulse?
I don't think so. I think this is really related to unwholesome decisions. A person who's accomplished in view would be incapable of making unwholesome decisions that lead to immediate unwholesome results, right? They might still gossip here or there, but there's not like immediate results, right, to something like a gossip. But if you killed another human being, it's going to create immediate results, right? If you have sexual misconduct where you're cheating on a partner, or you're a single person who's cheating with someone else's partner, it's going to create immediate results in the mind that is going to cause some significant problems. You would be incapable of doing that if you're accomplished in view, because it's going to lead to problems for you.
Okay, this last point as well. Incapable of seeking a person worthy of offerings outside here.
Yeah, so
what does this mean?
This one, he's talking, of course, about his Sangha, his community, and there's multiple communities. And what he's describing here is someone who's accomplished in view would understand his teachings really well, and they would understand that his teachings are the teachings that lead to enlightenment, and they would be incapable of seeing anyone else outside of his Sangha as worthy of offerings. So these other sects, these other teachers aren't worthy of offerings, or these other aesthetics who are practicing various practices then someone who's accomplished in view and really understands the Buddhist teachings deeply wouldn't consider anyone else worthy of making offerings.
Okay, got it. Thank you, David. Well, there's one more chapter that I'm interested in covering.
By the way, while we're on chapter
So if anyone else,
24, if you notice, point number 5 relates to what we were talking about in the group learning program on Sunday, right? When we were talking about misunderstandings of the Buddhist teachings, and I was talking about rites and rituals and ceremonies and superstition and belief. Here he's talking about someone accomplished in view would be incapable of resorting to the belief that purity, that enlightenment, comes about through superstition or auspicious acts, right? This is rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. So this is one of the key things that as you're moving about Buddhist communities, if you're seeing these things, then you understand that people are not yet accomplished in view who are participating in rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship.
yeah, got it. Okay, thank you, David. So if anyone has any more questions here, I'd encourage you to pop those into the chat box, either in Zoom or on Facebook now. And perhaps we can go to chapter 27, David. This is the only one I was looking to cover that I've got left. And so this is an expansion, actually, of the last. In fact, no, it's a different teaching here.
Mm-hmm.
He says 6 cases of incapability by one accomplished in view. So he gives 6 other points that would be incapable for someone accomplished in view.
Right.
And so one of the points he makes here is, let me just get the right one. Okay, so let's go through them actually. So incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made by oneself.
Mm-hmm.
Right, incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made by another. Incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are both made by oneself and made by another. And then that they are not made by oneself but have arisen by chance or accident. And they're not made by another but have arisen by accident or chance. And then finally, incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made neither by oneself nor by another but have arisen by accident or chance.
Yes.
So quite a bit to get our heads around here. But the one thing that stood out to me was number 1. So incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made by oneself.
I knew people would have questions on that.
Must be
What?
okay. Yeah.
What is pleasure and pain from?
Craving.
Okay. Is that the self?
No.
So you're incapable of resorting to the view of pleasure and pain are made by oneself because craving
Right.
is not the self.
Right.
And
Yeah, so
then,
he's pointing here that,
go ahead.
go on. So really, what he's saying here is that it's the emphasis on the self, the idea of the self, and then
Right.
by the same token, the idea of another self, another person
Right.
making the pleasure or pain.
So in
What
order,
he's not saying is that
sorry.
whatever this is not the cause of pleasure and pain.
Right. So one accomplished in view would clearly understand that pleasure and pain is based on craving, desire, and attachment. Someone would understand that very clearly. They would be incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made by oneself because someone accomplished in view would know that there is no self. And even in an introductory, discussion that I have, even though someone might not have eliminated the self, but even in an introductory discussion of the Four Noble Truths that I usually have, someone should emerge out of that and be able to be asked the question, what causes discontentedness? Craving, desire, attachment. not the self, because you would understand in the three universal truths that there is no self, right? So it's not oneself, right? It's the mind. It's the mind's craving, desire, attachment. And then number two, incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made by another. So yeah, you know that another person isn't causing the pleasure and pain. You should know that if you're accomplished in view. And then resorting to pleasure and pain are made by oneself and made by another. Well, if the first two are true, you're certainly not going to, you're certainly going to be incapable of number three. But this is one of the ways the Buddha would teach in order to kind of encompass everything. He always had kind of the catch-all. It's painful feelings, pleasant feelings, feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, right? There's this first one, there's the second one, and then there's the combined of both, right? He teaches that way to kind of be all-encompassing, to not leave anything out. And then he does that with the next four as well. Incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are not made by oneself, but have arisen by accident or chance, right? Like just by luck, by fate. This is where people say, oh, it's fate, it's predetermined, it's just by chance, it's good luck. You've asked the question before a couple of times, David, is there anything such as luck or good luck? And no. And here's the Buddha saying, okay, you would be incapable of being able to say that if you're accomplished in view. Incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are not made by another, but have arisen by accident or chance. So it's not by yourself, but arisen by accident or chance, are now made by another, or accident or by chance. And then the real big catch-all is incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made neither by oneself nor by another, but have arisen by accident or chance. Right? So this is another catch-all to kind of cover all things. So essentially, what he's getting to is that pleasure and pain are from craving, desire, attachment.
And then this last paragraph, he says, for what reason? Because the person accomplished in view has clearly seen causation and causally arisen objects.
Right.
So, there you go. Yeah.
Right. And this is the dependent origination.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David. We have just a clarification from Mika. He was asking about something you said earlier, right near the start, where he talks about how the Buddha sometimes talks about the opposite of what is true to help illustrate a point. And Mika's just asking for clarification. He says, "Sir, to present the false truth, isn't that wrong speech? You're not supposed to lie, right?"
He's not presenting the false truth. What he's doing is, in his discourse, he's sharing something. He's not saying this is the teaching. He's saying, think of this and consider this. So let me give an example. I can say, all right, so if you're accomplished in view, there's no such thing as the natural law of gravity, right? There's no such thing as the natural law of gravity. So I'm not lying. I'm sharing something to have you reflect and think about it, and then you come up with the truth to understand it. So he wasn't sharing it as truth. He was sharing it as a contrast to what he's going to actually teach, so that you can see the contrast. And by seeing the contrast, then you see his teachings more clearly. Because his teachings are not the truth, then what you're saying is the first thing is the truth. So he's going to share sometimes what isn't the truth, so that then when he shares the truth, you can see it more clearly because of the contrast. It's like, how would you know that black is black if you've never seen white? Right? You've got to see black in white so that you know what is black and what is white. Right? So he's showing you black so that you can see white.
Just a follow up, David. So when it comes to wrong speech and lying, it's really about what is being communicated, right, as opposed to what is being literally said. Right?
Yeah, I mean, what he's
Sometimes we tell jokes in a way that we say something literally, even though we both know what's being said is something else. Doesn't mean it's a lie, because you know the other person knows the truth, and they know that you know the truth. So no one's being deceived in any way. But
well,
if you actually looked at what was being said and say you saw it written down, you'd say, well, did they really mean that? Is that the truth?
well, keep in mind what you're looking here is you're looking at an extract, right? You're looking at, in some cases, something that's 20, 30 pages long, and they've extracted, 3 paragraphs. So prior to the Buddha saying something that is in contrast to his teachings, he might have said, "Bhikkhus, think about this. Does this make sense?" And then said the contrast, the black, and then said the white. So what you're seeing is just a small smidget of the entire discourse. So what you're seeing could be out of context if you don't understand the full context of what he's saying. But if you understand that he is going to say black in order for you to see white more clearly, that he's not lying. He's just giving the student something to think about in contrast to what he was going to say, and you don't know what was before this. If you're ever curious of what's before this, what you can do is you can take some of the lines of this and put it in Google, and then you'll get the whole entire sutra, rather than just this little smidget. So you can see what's before this and you can see what's after this. But the Buddha's not going to lie. Even when he tells a joke, he's using it as a teaching device to show the contrast of black and white.
Okay, thank you, David. We have no more questions.
Okay, so this particular book, a bit more challenging for you guys, right? And really challenging for me to explain it. As you read through these chapters, there's going to be certain chapters that you read and you read and you read and you're just trying to get something out of it, and it's almost like trying to get juice out of a turnip, right? It's not, there's nothing coming out of it. And what a lot of these boil down to is what's really important for me to learn and understand as part of this path. And that's what I tried to do with dependent origination. Is what's important for you to understand is that you're having birth, you've had birth, you've had lots and lots of birth, you've had these existences, and it's these 6 sense bases that are the mind's craving through these 6 sense bases, and it's happening because of ignorance. And ignorance is keeping this mind locked in the unenlightened state. By training the mind, gaining wisdom, you unravel this whole stream of dependent origination, of this causal arisen objects from one thing to the next, right? So the Buddha is going to teach in an excruciating amount of detail. When we get into the natural law of karma in here, you're going to learn about black karma and white karma and gray karma and all of these different types of karma, which I haven't taught at all, because you don't need to know that level of detail in order to really get to cessation or elimination of discontentedness, this enlightened mental state. What I like to do and what I plan to do once I go through all these books and get them into the computer is I plan to go back and then put a box underneath each one of these teachings and kind of extrapolate what it is you really need to know in order to attain enlightenment. Because sometimes people look at the words of the Buddha and it's like, there's got to be something there that he's trying to teach me. What is it? It's like talking to a wall, perhaps, for you, because he's 2,500 years ago. You can't ask him questions anymore, but you can ask questions to me. And there's certain Dhamma teachings that you might encounter, and I would say, oh, you don't need to know that. Like, for example, in the Gotama book, when we get to the black, white, gray, different types of Gama, I'm going to tell you, you don't need to know that level of detail in order to get to enlightenment. But because the Buddha's wisdom was so deep, he's going to explain it in excruciating level of detail. What I'm going to be able to give for you is, out of all of this massive amount of teachings that the Buddha shared, what is it that you truly need in order to get to enlightenment? So I'm going to extrapolate that for you. And today, because of dependent origination, it kind of felt like a little bit maybe like we were walking through mud a couple of times, trying to sort out some of these very detailed aspects of the Buddhist teachings. So in some situations, you might just want to ask, what do I need to know here, if anything? And in some cases, it's going to be, there's really nothing here that you need to necessarily know, or I can just extrapolate 1 or 2 points out of a particular Dhamma teaching. So don't feel like you have to know everything that the Buddha taught. This is where people get mired down in his teachings, in books upon books upon books upon books, Dhamma talk after Dhamma talk after Dhamma talk after Dhamma talk. What all of this boils down to is the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, the 3 poisons, the 10 fetters, the natural law of Gama, understanding how to eradicate all of these things. This is what it really all boils down to, and that's what this book does. This book really boils it down to, what do you truly need to know in order to get to enlightenment? And that's why I really consolidated everything down into this book, because the Buddha's teachings are massive, and this book and the guidance that I can offer you as part of that are what you need to get to enlightenment. This further study that we're doing, it's going to expand upon and add deeper wisdom to what it is that you're studying, but don't have this mental longing and strong eagerness to know every last little word that the Buddha taught, and feel like every last little sentence has got to have some meaning that you are supposed to understand, because that's not the way his teachings are. And if you're ever curious, you can get into these classes, or you can send me a private message, or you can schedule a personal discussion where you might just ask me, David, boil it down for me. What do I really need to know here? And that's what we don't have yet related to these Buddha Vajrayana books. That's what I did here. When you get to the box that has the Buddha's teachings, at the end of that box, I wrote author's thoughts, and I boiled it down for you. And that's what you've been used to, right? That's what you've been used to studying, is seeing the Buddha's words and then having my thoughts right afterwards to help you understand what it is the Buddha was talking about. You don't have that in these books. That's why this is a PhD program. It's more independent. It's more on your own. You got to do a lot of reflecting, a lot of thinking. And even then, you still might not fully understand it. And even then, when you come into the class, the answer might be, you don't need to understand that in order to get to enlightenment. So don't be surprised if that's what I share with you in certain situations. So keep learning, keep studying. I think the latter part of this book is a bit more digestible. The first part of this book had a lot of dependent origination in it, but the second half of this book doesn't have as much dependent origination in there. It gets to some other teachings around stream entry. So continue to stick with it. And when we get to the book after Sotapanna, which is this book, it goes back to kind of the type of teachings that you saw in the first book, Dhamma Trails. And the same thing, which is the fourth book, when you get to this one, Easy Pass, it kind of gets back to more of that flavor of the first book of Dhamma Trails. But this book of Sotapanna, it's very technical, has a lot of technical descriptions of the dependent origination. So I don't know that any of you guys are discouraged, but I'm going to encourage you not to get discouraged. And if you are discouraged about any of these that you're kind of having to maybe walk through the mud a little bit and you're not quite understanding it, that's okay. Because a lot of these teachings, you have to sit with them for many weeks and maybe even many months, right? Think about non-self. I introduced that at the very beginning of the group learning program. Some of you probably still don't quite understand non-self yet, and some of you maybe do. The Buddhist teachings are such that they really need to be steeped into the mind. Think about the old coffee pots. I don't know if you guys know what a percolator is, where you boil water and the water comes up through the stem and it just kind of soaks through the coffee grounds and you just kind of percolate. And over time, the coffee becomes more and more strong. It becomes more and more coffee. Whereas if you just percolate the coffee for a couple of minutes, you're going to have something that looks kind of like tea. But the more you boil this water, the more you investigate the Buddhist teachings, the more you percolate and allow the teachings to soak in, the more sense they will make to you. So being able to explain dependent origination in kind of one sitting in online class so far away, it isn't quite an easy task to explain all of this. But as we go, I think you'll see more and more teachings that do relate to what it is that you need to learn and practice now. And as I get all of this stuff fed into the computer, I can then double back and start putting authors' thoughts under each one of these teachings. And that's what we should have by the time we get to the end of this 7-month journey with this Buddha Vajana program, this Pali Canon English program, is I should have a published book for each of these 13 that has the Buddhist teachings, cleaned up translations, cleaned up titles, as well as the author's thoughts, which will be me, the author's thoughts under each one of these. So that should make it a little bit more of a learning experience, because you'll be able to learn the Buddhist teachings with cleaned up translations and my thoughts right afterwards, and kind of help you soak these teachings in a bit more. So the materials that we're learning with aren't quite there yet, right? This is part of impermanence. But rather than holding these back and not teaching you guys what's in here, I thought, you know what? Let's go forward. Let's just see where we end up. And what you're doing and kind of, working through these teachings, it's helping you. You're going to be learning. And it's also helping me to form up these books so that the second, third, fourth iteration of this program will get better and better and better. And that's what it means to be a community, right? That everything's not going to be perfect. Everything's not going to be the way we expected it. So just throw out the expectations and let's just dive in and see what you learn, right? Rather than just kind of waiting for the perfect book to be delivered, let's just roll up the sleeves and dive in and make ourselves muddy and messy and like roll around, right? So I appreciate your patience in reading through this. I appreciate your patience in going through and learning some of these things. Each session is going to be a bit different, and we're going to be able to learn different things. And don't expect that each session is going to be the same, each book going to be the same, because that first book that we explored had a lot of really interesting similes and stories, and things really made sense, and there was a lot of connections, where this book is like, hold on, this is a bit technical here. And then with the language and the translations not being quite 100% of what I would necessarily recommend they be, it's a bit challenging to wade through some of this. And this is what it means to be working through impermanence and really digging into the Buddhist teachings. But the more patience you have with it, and that's a lesson in and of itself, is having patience to really work your way through this. And that's why I've also mentioned that, you might want to just read for 5 or 10 minutes a day and not really sit down and try to take it in an hour's time. Read just 10, 15 minutes. There were times when I planned to sit down to read for an hour or two, and I would be 5 minutes into one of these books, and I was like, whoa, I got to think about that, right? I've got to really think about that. I'm going to put it down now. Even though the thought and the plan going in was to read for an hour or two, I got 5 minutes in and I wasn't attached to the 1 hour or 2 hours. So I just put it down after 5 minutes and just thought about it. And that's the way you've got to see this, is that you're wading through 2,500 years of impermanence. And you've got a tour guide, but we're still going through the mud a bit here. And that can be kind of fun to play in the mud sometimes. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for your dedication to learning and practicing. On Sunday, tomorrow, in the group learning program, we're going to be in the additional content at the back of the book, which is the frequently asked questions. So if you haven't read through those, there's about 11 of those there. And then there's the part about how to determine if you're enlightened or not, how to determine if you've attained enlightenment or nibbana. So we'll be going through that in our group learning program tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we'll be doing breathing mindfulness meditation. That's going to be on Wednesday. And then next Saturday, we're going to be in the last part of this book, chapter 28 through chapter 53. So you can study that as well. And then after that, once we get into the future Sundays, we've got a whole bunch of new classes coming up that I think are really going to be helpful for all of you. So I'm glad that you guys are continuing through the group learning program, as well as in this program, the Pali Canon and English study group. Thank you for joining. Have a really wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you either Sunday, Wednesday, or next Saturday, perhaps all three. Until then, have a wonderful day. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.